Thank you, everyone, for coming to this third after-lunch session. Our next speaker is called Brenda Wallace. She comes all the way from Aotearoa, New Zealand, where she is one of the persons better placed for fighting against robot apocalypse, since she is able to write code and also grow food. And I can say, having shared sessions with her in conferences, that she's regularly one of the people who has the best signal-to-noise ratio. So please give a great hand of applause to Brenda Wallace.
Cool. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi nui ki te mana whenua tēnei wahi, e tipu ake ana hau ki te taho e te awa Waikato, e arohati ana hau ki te mongo Ruapehu, ko Ngāti Pākehā no Mangakino o hau. I just said my name's Brenda. Te reo Māori is the first language of my country, and we like to start first with that language when we speak. This is the flag of my country. It's the laser kiwi. There was a referendum and someone vetoed this, but if not for that person, this would have been our flag. I work for the government of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm going to talk about law. Do not use me for legal advice. Don't act on anything I say unless it's Python. Okay, have you been ever asked to turn rules into code? Someone, yeah, put your hand up. Anyone? Yeah, that's pretty much what programmers do. You might have a team, you might be by yourself. The people who invented the rules and understand them, they might be in the room with you, but lots of times they're not. Here's the rules, make the code. This is normal. Have you ever been asked to put law into code? I bet you probably have. Has anyone ever had to implement GST on a sale? Something like that? Yeah, that came from law. That is you turning law into it. There are lots of laws a lot of rules that are invented by humans. Laws, regulation, policy, they're invented by humans. There are laws of science. We didn't invent those, we worked them out. The laws of mathematics, we just try and work out what they are. But these laws that were invented by humans, there's so much room for interpretation. We made this stuff up as a species. Have you ever been asked to implement rules that humans just made up? Go, cool, yeah. So that's pretty much what it's like. It could come from policy, regulation. This is stuff where there's a police force behind some of this stuff, right? This is rules where you and I got to follow it, but someone made it up. Was there an expert present? Ever had to encode the rules into software where the expert was not there? Yeah, we're going to put hand. We'll stop doing hands up now. Sometimes the expert is a lawyer. Do you know what lawyers charge per hour? You think software people are well paid. You're thinking more like, sort of 1,800 an hour sort of thing. That's in New Zealand, probably more in Sydney for all I know. They're really expensive, so lots of times they're not present. So you're left there, yeah, code is rules. You're turning rules into code. I'm skipping a slide over. You're trying to put it into the code, and the people who could actually explain it to you are just not there. Does everyone know that code is rules? Well, lots of people who are not coders have no idea that that's exactly the same thing. And when I've got little tweet storms at me about how dare you turn rules into code, I'm like, this is the same thing all the time. Cool, so let's go to legislation. I'm going to use a lot of New Zealand legislation examples. I'm pretty sure you'll have an equivalent here in Australia. I mean, we get holiday from our employment. You guys must too, I hope, sometimes. Yep, that sort of thing. You guys pay tax. Yep, that sort of stuff. Yep, we do that too. So when you read legislation, it is like reading someone else's code that has been edited again and again for 40 years. That's my summary. You're looking at it and going, why does it suddenly change tone from being friendly and helpful to being punitive and mean? Like you're reading the Social Security Act and it's all about, we'll help you when you're unemployed to get you better. But if you cut your own limb off, you're in trouble. And you're just like, what? They change tone so suddenly because it's the really, really old code base. All right, so here's what legislation as code means when we work on it in our team. It isn't working out if you committed murder, is it premeditated? It's not Judge Dredd. It's not that stuff. It's if you receive a fee for being a director of a company, 33% of that is owed as tax. It's simple stuff. There's no ambiguity in that. So if there's no ambiguity, the computer does it. We could all manually, with our abacus, calculate directors' fees, but we don't. We put it in software, and it's processed by computers. That's legislation turned into code. You're already doing it. Every time you buy something with sales tax in it, that computer, probably at the till or maybe before it got put in a database, have implemented legislation as code. And you have GST in Australia, don't you? 10%? Yeah, you could probably do 10% in your head, but you can't be bothered. You let the computer do it, basically. And it's done every day. Here's an example. This is a piece of New Zealand legislation. I'm really sure you've got something this complicated. Can we even read that? $1 for each $8 by which the ratepayer's income in the preceding tax year exceeded that number, the last being increased by 500 in respect of each person who is a dependent of the ratepayer, something, 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 or $640, whichever is smaller, right? And you look at that, and I can't do that in my head, right? And the person who wrote it in 1974. They're not here to help you work out what they meant. It's been edited every year, pretty much. There's been a gap. Once I plotted that, I worked out it's a parabola. So it gives the best amount of money to people who are poor and people who are rich. Everyone in the middle doesn't get very much at all. So, and I can't say, hey, person who understands the rules, is that what you meant to do? Because they probably retired in the 90s, right? They're long gone. So I was tasked with implementing this. This is an act of parliament that helps people on low incomes and or a high number of dependents, another word for children usually, helps them not be forced out of their house by rising rates. So they call it the same thing here. Rates is what you pay your local council. Yep, cool. So if that goes up and up along with your housing prices, people can get forced out of their home by the cost. And then you end up in the public housing system, which is worse for everybody, right? So this was one of these good things they were trying to do to help people. And it's really complicated. We implemented that and we found a bug. We found a bug that had been in there for a very long time and no one had noticed. It says $1 for every $8, and people had been implementing it as 1/8. It's not the same thing. You had to get to a full $8 and then you get another $1, see? They're subtle. We released our code open source, and a guy in Singapore for the Singapore government spotted the bug for us. So thank you, Singapore. It was great. And then we had to go and fix things. It turned out we've been overpaying, not underpaying, which is wonderful. How bad can it be? This is, New Zealand has a Holidays Act. It tells you how much paid time off you get as an employee, and a whole lot of other things as well. It's employment law, and I don't know what happens in Australia, but anytime there's an earthquake, we suddenly tinker with employment law. I don't know why. Emergency change employment law would be my framing. So it has been edited and edited and edited, and it got to the point where you would stare at it, and everybody came to different conclusions. Why does that matter? Well, we ended up with this situation where how much holidays you get depends on what software your employer installs, right? That's not how it's supposed to be. So people are implementing legislation as code in every payroll software all over the place. Okay, it's a code base written in legalese. There are people who are very fluent in this. I'm not. I'm becoming more, but I'm not a lawyer. It's written by humans, so it's not like the laws of mathematics. It's something we made up and we tinker. It's 17 years old, but I like the last line. It has no regression tests. All right, they would have done tests, right? That they do forecasting and modeling, but they don't publish it when they publish their code. Their tests would have been on some scenarios, probably very, very clever people who know these things, but they don't publish it for then people who are doing their payroll software to say, did I come to the same conclusion? All right, so you're implementing payroll software today. You have to re-implement this giant Holidays Act in software and the Income Tax Act. I don't know, you guys don't have accident compensation? No. Oh, you have something, I hope. If you get an accident, the government, an agency, a corporation that is owned by the government will help you recover and meet your loss of income while you recover. You've got your pension, you've got child support, you've got all these things, right, in payroll software, and every single one of them is very complicated, and you can't see all the other closed source from everybody else. So all these things have room to be different between software packages. Not how it's supposed to be at all. Here's how laws get made, and this is my understanding. Parliament publishes a corpus of law. It's huge. It's on a website. Not every country puts it on their website. There's some places you have to go buy it, right, and maintain your own set of books. You know, if you ever see like one of those, usually American law shows, and they have these books behind them, they get sent patch sets. They do. They get you subscribe, and this book comes, and they open it, and it says, go to page X and change paragraph B from this to this. And they have to subscribe. And the lawyer themselves aren't doing it. Their staff are doing it for them. But they annotate. They do, like, you know, unified diffs. It's not quite that, but it's instructions. So they have a fully maintained, it's like a prestige symbol, you know, status symbol, to have all your books fully patched behind you. That's why they show them off. So, yeah, so people have this. In New Zealand, we have it on legislation.gov.nz. I hope your legislation is somewhere the average person can get to. Yeah, some of it, cool, that's good. I was doing some work with Uruguay, and halfway through the project, they made it private again, which was really quite hard because we were implementing some of their law. That was fun. You get a lawyer to help you read the law or not. If the lawyer's not present, you read the plain language advice on a website. Might be a government website, might be someone trying to interpret it for you. It's like Stack Overflow, but for, you know, law. And then the coder turns it into code, leaves it closed source, and applies it to everybody's paycheck. Done. To be honest, the person at Parliament will be an expert. You'll never get to meet them. The plain English explanation is not machine understandable, so you have to translate it. You're a modem for this thing. I'm going to mention spreadsheets. People trade spreadsheets, especially non-coders, and then they'll copy the formula in the spreadsheet because it's easier than trying to understand the legislation. You don't know that the spreadsheet was correct, and often it isn't. So you will find that the same formula is used in 10 software packages because they all copied the same spreadsheet and they all got it wrong. Yeah, and we copy it into real programming languages. It's you and your keyboard and an expert who went home 17 years ago. You can't ask them, did you really mean this? You can't point out that computers can't do this. You can't point out that you've written an impossibility, it must be X and it must not be X. It's not that. So in New Zealand, I proposed, and my team have been working on doing better. We're not the first country to propose legislation as code, but yeah, we're going for it, and we're collaborating with the others. All right, so right now, when you write legislation, when you've got a new idea for how the rules should be, you have a policy officer. That's the expert. They know how it works, right? In and out, they're living and breathing, I don't know, employment law. They have a drafter. This person knows how to turn what they said into legislation. So the policy drafters are incredibly smart people. I've fallen in with them on Twitter, and they're complete nerds about their legal language. So they don't have things like Git and pull requests. They don't have these things, but they do have their own precise language, and they have coding standards. They'll look at things written 30 years ago and say, we don't use that style anymore, but it's still law, right? We've still got that code base. They'll be like, oh, we wouldn't write it like that now. And there's some MPs involved somewhere. I don't know what they do, but they read it, I understand. This is what I propose. This is not what they do. This is what we propose to do in New Zealand, that we get parliamentary coders. So working in agile teams, because agile is very cool, and everyone likes that word. And they work with the drafters. So when they are turning it into legalese, you also turn it into Python, right next to it. When you publish the legislation, you publish the rules. You also publish your regression tests. So regression tests, you guys know what they are, but for anyone on the video, and the way we did it, here's the input, here's the expected output. That's a regression test at its simplest level. I find that once you've published it in one language, be it JavaScript, Ruby, whatever, one programming language, it's really easy to transcribe it to another. It's much easier to take JavaScript, turn it into Python, than it is to take law and turn it into Python. And if you don't like that we wrote it in Python, you can use our regression tests to check that your own version in Scala or something is doing the same result. All right, I wanted to talk about why I chose Python. I'm going to do this talk at RubyConf, so it's probably more important there. You guys get why we choose Python. Coding itself is no longer an aloof ivory tower, at least I really want it to not be. It is another form of literacy. It's taught in school. And I think that people who are writing legislation that will be implemented by machines should know enough about how to code the very thing that they are writing. If they were writing must be $1 for every eighth, being able to write that in a bit of Python would be really, really good. The other thing I really want is linters. I love linters. I'm a tech lead, okay, and a big part of my job is reading pull requests and encouraging people to improve and learning myself. And it's one thing for me to say you really should put some semicolons in this, or maybe not in Python, it's a bad example, but moving on with it. And it's one thing for me to say it, and it gets quite tense if you're saying it again and again and again. And as soon as I say, how about you use a linter? Then it's the linter saying it, so all the aggression is gone. It's the linter saying thou shalt have semicolons. So I really want this, and I really want cyclomatic complexity too high, pull request rejected. Having that for law would be amazing. You need to break it down so that people can understand what it even means. Cool. If it is really dreadfully complicated, some things are complicated, so the law that backs them should be, but other things just aren't. And if you've ever refactored code, you can have some really complex stuff, and if you keep going until the linter is happy, you can often have something really beautiful at the end, and it's worth it. A robot telling you that you need to reduce the complexity and make it look like all the other things in that act would be beautiful. The policy officer who, in my scenario, I missed out something. We actually did this. We did this on an act very, very recently, and I'd like to describe it. So when we have the expert still present and the coders in the room as well, trying to do the first ever implementation of this legislation that we're still drafting, that coder can say, computers can't do that. That you've said it must be and it must not be, and I can't write a regression test that says that, so therefore it can't be done with computers. Do you really intend to do something that's impossible, right? And you frame it in the right language, not condescending contempt, but, you know, reading the keynote this morning. But you say, you can catch it early. You can catch all the complexity, all the mistakes, not all of them, a lot more mistakes, a lot more edge cases, because the expert's still present and a coder's still trying to implement it. A person in my team once said to me at the end of our experiment, you haven't understood a policy until you've explained it to a machine. As soon as you can do that, you're there. And you can say things like, with that rates rebate, did you really mean for poor people to pay more than everybody else? And sometimes the answer is yes, all right? Politics is what it is, right? But if it's not, they can catch it. So we use Python. So I used to work with people who could draw very realistic monkeys, and they could also write Python. Their main skill set was something else, and Python on the side. And I love that about Python. It's a beautiful language. It's almost the beige of language. It's so straightforward, right? You just use it. So we chose that to use, given it strides into science and it strides into visual effects, basically. Our unit tests are in YAML. So this input, that output. YAML's reasonably, well, you can translate it into XML if that's what you're into. We hosted it on an API. So if you didn't want to work out how to run Python, you could just talk to my API. And we also set it up for PaaS. There's like Heroku and stuff like that. One click, have your own one. So I don't need to know what you're doing on my API. We found it much easier to transcribe from Python to JavaScript or whatever language you like. So this is an example of the sort of thing that people are told to implement. If you could see that already in JavaScript, you'd probably do much better than seeing that as it is right now in the law. Cool, your test is supplied. I'm going to skip because I've only got 10 minutes. All right, so New South Wales asked me to come and do some Legis code. This was really fun because I got to come to Sydney for a week. We did sports vouchers. Here we go. What is a 4.5-year-old? You have to be 4.5 to get this. And I asked the policy officers, what is a 4.5-year-old? And they didn't know either. And it was about 2 weeks after I left that they came back and they worked out what a 4.5-year-old was. And that's the thing. It was 6 months after your birthday, but it was the first day of the month of the birthday. Yeah, it was not what I thought it would be. But I asked them all sorts of questions. I asked them questions that a nerd would do, and I had this obvious moment, wait a minute, birth dates, they don't have time zones. So when do you turn 4.5? Is it because what time zone were you born in? And I got really into detail. And no, they don't have it. So it's when your birthday occurs in the place that you're standing, and then if you fly to the UK, you can do your birthday again. And it's weird. And I was like, if it's a leap year, is it at midnight? And if it's what time of day were you born? And just ridiculous questions that nerds ask. And to them, they're like, oh, it's when they're 4.5. So actually getting a machine to implement is someone 4.5 is actually really complicated. And they had never, at first they're like, why are you asking stupid questions? And then they realize, because otherwise I can't tell the machine what to do. Here's some edge cases, because people find these fun. Sometimes a mother is younger than her daughter, with a T. That's because a mother and a stepmother are the same thing in law. And you can be in New Zealand married at 16 and you're a child till 18. So there you go, you've got a child and you're 16. It's interesting. These are edge cases, so you can populate those automatically. How many kids do you have? It depends. Under one act, you'll have 2, another you'll have 3. For example, if one of your children is receiving a young parent payment because they're a parent at a young age, they're no longer considered your child under the act because they've been independently supported. So you can't, as a solo mother, claim for a child who's already getting one as a young parent. See? There's scope. So there's scope in law. I'm going to speed up. This one is, are you ever married? I found 7 definitions. The funnest one was in student allowance. You think you're married, but you're not under student allowance because you have to be 25. So they instead of changing the regulations to say you must be 25, they monkey patched marriage. Yeah, basically. Yeah, they monkey patched it. So you think you're reading law and it looks really straightforward, but you don't realize that half the words have been monkey patched, right? Citizenship. I don't have time for my fun citizenship story, I think. Can I have it? All right, let's do it. Okay. So, we have an act of parliament called the Citizenship Act, and you can get citizenship by grant. That's when someone grants you citizenship. In order to get it, let's go. Boom, boom, boom. Don't read all that. It's like there's clause 2 and 2B2. You have to be here for at least 240 days of each of the last 5 years, right? Seems reasonable? Let's say you took a holiday in one of those years. It's not calendar years, it's rolling years. And it's rolling years on the date in which you apply. So you go back till the day after the 1 year ago, right? So let's say you take a giant holiday, and that means in one of those 5 years you're not eligible, you can't be a citizen. Except, what if you moved the calendar rolling year so your holiday gets split in half? So suddenly that you're away 70 days in this year and 70 days in that year, now you're eligible. But then you wait too long and the window moves, and now you're not eligible. But then you are, but then you're not, but then you are, but then you're not. But let's say you're not a nerd who understands this stuff. You're calling the helpline and you're saying, when am I eligible? And someone on the phone has to say, Tuesday and Wednesday, but not Thursday. But don't do it on Saturday because it's because you were in and out of the country, right? So people think, I'm going to become eligible on that date, when actually they become eligible, ineligible, back and forth, back and forth. So this is really easy to write in code. It's really hard to explain to people on the phone that they're eligible, but not on Saturday. This is it in Python. It's actually, oh no, I'm going to go back. So you got little things like, this is how you turn it into, are you 16? Are you at full capacity? We don't get the computer to work out, are you at full capacity? You supply it. Yeah. So once it's supplied, you calculate it. And this is it. It's really straightforward in Python. All the variables, it's vectorial maths, which is out of scope for this talk, but it's fun. So I think it's gone to the day of hero coders where only a coder can do this stuff. I think that we can get this stuff into legislative drafting and into publication of legislation. And it's basically DevOps for law. It's the culture change of admitting we're human, admitting we're making mistakes, and putting regex up there and looking for bugs, enthusiastically for bugs in our code. We built it in Python. It's released under AGPL. And it's AGPL because France started the project and they put it under AGPL. So that's what we're doing. And New South Wales have taken our work, so New South Wales have it too. And Singapore they have their own implementation in a different engine, and they've been spotting bugs for us because we're releasing it open source, as you should. So work in the open. There's a concept in there of calculating for a point of time. So you could ask it, am I eligible for the unemployment benefit? It's not called that, but we'll go with it. That you have to calculate it for a point in time. You are eligible for the 1st of January, yes, but if you recalculate it for the 12th of December, no, because you had a job then, right? That's simple. So when we do calculations, everything is for a point in time. You set variables for a point in time, and then you calculate a variable for a point in time. There's concepts here that are fun. Here's an example of a variable. Are you a citizen? Are you a child? You could supply that, or you could have it calculate, are you a child? Because maybe you don't know. It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated. So this is what it looks like on the API. It's just JSON over HTTP. You subscribe a person. Tahi's just Māori for one, but it's person number 1. They're a resident. They're normally here in New Zealand on these dates. And Tama's Māori for son, so that their son has these attributes. So it's kind of like a state machine, but almost. And see the one that's null, it's the 3rd one down. Are they eligible for child disability allowance? You see, pass that in as a null, it calculates it. Anything you pass in as a null, it calculates, if it can. And then you get an answer, a true or a false. The tests, it's wrapped a bit, but the tests look like that. It's in YAML, you pass in as much input. You could pass in your birth date and have it calculate your age, or you can pass in your age. Not everyone wants to pass the full details. So if someone passes in their age, we can only calculate it for that day. We can't calculate it because we don't know when the age is going to change. But based on their age, which is an int, not a float, which is interesting, they can get all this. And we put it up here. So that's if you want to go hit my Heroku. It'll cope, I think. We put a little Rails app on top so you could visualize and see the variables. So a variable is a state that you set on a person or a family. This is a concept in New Zealand law, or a property. We couldn't use the word property because it's in Python and it's a reserved word, so they're called titled properties. But it means your house, that you own the land, that sort of thing. We've done these acts of parliament, so we've encoded these into Ledger's code. And I'm almost out of time, but these are, you'll see the theme. There are numbers in these, there are unambiguous yes-nos in almost all these acts, and we've started there. Someone sent me pull requests for these. KiwiSaver is our pension. Someone sent me a pull request for owner donor compensation. I need to get an actual expert to double check it, but it looks good, sure. And it adds transparency, reusability, and removes ambiguity from our law, which I think is a great positive. I want to do this. This is an experiment. If I can turn it into code, I can then take the code and turn it into Samoan language or Hindi. These are the most common, the first 3 are the most common languages amongst people who don't speak English in New Zealand. And the 4th one is Te Reo Māori, which is a thing that we have an obligation on many levels to do in government in New Zealand. And you're encouraged to please come by. You can fork it, do what you want, start your own country, I don't know. But yeah, and encourage it in your own jurisdictions. You guys have state and federal. You have lots of opportunities to do representing of rules as code. I know that Wellington City was running some experiments. They haven't published it yet on their, I think, something to do with building code or planning or something like that. Anything that's complicated is unambiguous in its numbers. Send me bug reports, which is always fun to take to the department and tell them they'll be doing it wrong, but I'd rather know than not. And yes, please, have a look. Thank you.
We've run to time, so there can't be any questions here, but I'm sure Brenda will be happy to take them later in the room, later in the outside. It's time for afternoon tea. And I want to say thank you, and thank you to Aotearoa New Zealand for giving us such good example of good practices. And please, another hand of applause for Brenda.